Welcome to episode 430 of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Melanie McQuaid. Melanie is probably very familiar to long-time listeners because she has been on the show before in episodes 374 and 196. But in today's episode we talk about her qualifying for and racing in Kona as the first ever professional 50-year-old athlete to do so. And we, of course, bring that into a more general discussion about training considerations for older athletes. Then we go into a long Q&A session, and I want to thank you all for the great questions that have been sent in, and also encourage everybody to keep sending in questions, as even when I haven't specifically planned for a Q&A episode, I always store every question that comes in, and once I reach a certain number of questions in the inbox, then I can always do an impromptu Q&A episode, either as a solo episode or with a guest like here with Mel. I do read and answer all the questions that I receive. I should caveat that maybe by saying that all the questions that I receive via email, because I am pretty bad at reading messages on other platforms, so I might often miss those or get back to them very, very late. With the exception being, of course, when I put out request for questions in the Instagram stories. When I specifically ask for it, then of course I get all of those questions and store them. But when I get questions in my inbox outside of those times, then I might be a bit bad at reading those. So apologies for that, but just get in touch with me via email if you want to make sure to, that I will really see that in a timely manner. And speaking of call-outs for questions, while we haven't really finalized the scheduling yet, and this may still be a month or two down the line, it does look like I may be able to get Training Peaks CEO Dirk Friel on the podcast to discuss Training Peaks as a platform. Normally, I don't have brand representatives on the podcast except for very occasionally actual sponsors of the podcast. And in those cases, of course, it's always disclosed that they are a sponsor when that happens. But I do want to make an exception here for Dirk and Training Peaks just because they are such a massive part of the triathlon ecosystem. I don't know, of course, the percentage of athletes and coaches using it as their platform of choice, but it must be very, very high. And as you probably know, that's what we use here at Scientific Triathlon as well. So assuming that we can make it work with the scheduling and everything, we will have a segment of listener questions about Training Peaks and about training platforms in general. And as this is a very popular discussion topic at the water cooler among triathletes, I think this is a fantastic opportunity for listeners of TTS to get a question in for Dirk. So if you have a question for Dirk Friel, CEO of Training Peaks, please email it to me, and then I'll put all of the questions in a list and pick quite a number of them, hopefully as many as possible, to make it into the interview. And just make sure that it's not a customer support type question, because those can be sent into the excellent Training Peaks customer support team. But questions that are relevant for this type of interview, things like the future of Training Peaks, the future of training platforms, those sorts of things are super relevant. And I'm sure a lot of other things as well, but not pure customer support questions, because that's not the right forum or the right avenue to get that kind of support. All right, and sorry for the long intro, but I have one more thing to mention, which is that I already forgot my new 2024 rapid fire question, which is for the podcast guest to make picks for the men's and women's podium in the Paris Olympics. I forgot to ask Mel this question at the end of this interview, and I also forgot to ask that of Bex Mills in episode 429 a couple of weeks ago. But both of them have answered me via email, and I have added their answers to the Excel spreadsheet that you can find through the link in the show notes, and I will read out both of their answers, their picks, after the interview here today. Now, finally, before we get into the interview, big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Fuel and Hydration. They create carbohydrate and electrolyte products that are effective, practical, and tasty. Their gels contain 30 or 90 grams of carbohydrate, making it really easy to carry and to keep track of fuel consumption. Their electrolytes come in different strengths, so you can match your sweat sodium content, which you can estimate for free on their website. And for longer rides, when you might want something to chew on, I really, really like their delicious chews. I've used the entire range of Precision Fuel and Hydration products for years, and I think they are absolutely fantastic. And as a TTS listener, you can get 15% off your first order by using the code TTS24 on precisionfuelandhydration.com. And thank you to Zen8. The Zen8 indoor swim trainer allows you to improve your technique, power, and swim training consistency. The great thing about the Senate is that it's so versatile, so you can make it work to suit your swim-specific needs. For a lot of athletes, the primary need may be to work on technique, which the Senate does allow you to do. And for others, it might be to improve force and power. Senate have a great library of video-guided workouts, so you can pick and choose from them and find the workouts that are best suited to your specific needs. And you can try the Senate risk-free for 30 days and get 20% off your first order on senateintrainer.com/TTS. Sorry for the longer than normal introduction, but now let's get right into the interview with Coach Melanie McQuaid. Welcome back to That Triathlon Show, Mel. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for inviting me back. This is it's going to be a great discussion.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. It's always good to chat to you. For listeners that may be newer or haven't happened to hear you on the previous appearances that you've made on the show, can you just briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Melanie McQuaid. I live in Victoria, British Columbia. I'm a former professional mountain bike racer who raced a bunch of Xterra for about 10 years. I won 3 world titles in Xterra, 2 in the cross triathlon I2 multisport discipline. I currently race Ironman as a 50-year-old pro. I'm the oldest pro, male or female, to podium in Ironman. I was second in Maryland and third in Coeur d'Alene last year. And that actually also made me the oldest person to qualify for Kona, which I raced last year as well. And I coach athletes from professional to, beginner under my Melrad coaching business. That is, kind of like a small little squad of people that I work with one-on-one.
Excellent. And last time we chatted, we did talk about a bit more about your own career in the sense of racing professionally at an older age. And we did discuss that you had that goal of maybe qualifying for Kona as a 50-year-old. So now that you've achieved that, congratulations. And can you share, maybe, are there any learnings that you took from that, things that worked particularly well for, and this might not be just last year, but it might be an accumulation of years that have worked well of training and racing at an older age in professional ranks, but share some thoughts on how that came to be.
Sure. Yeah, I think no matter what the goal is or like how attainable it is in whatever time frame, I think you set goals, and then the best way to achieve them is to largely forget about them and then go back to the things that motivate you to try and improve yourself. And I know I've mentioned this before, that every single year I debrief the year with myself. I am my own coach. I'm self-coached. And I look at, okay, did I improve this year? What went right? What went wrong? What could I do better? And then I go, okay, where are my opportunities? Like, what are the things that are going to get me excited to potentially get better again? And every season, if I see an opportunity that I could close a gap or try to address a weakness, then it gives me something to focus on that could potentially create that slightly better performance that could lead me towards whatever that next goal was. And I think once you do that, then I sort of lean in and focus on the steps that I need to make to close that gap. And then I really emphasize what experience do I get from this? Like what is this doing for me from a life enjoyment perspective? I think when I first started my coaching business, a lot of it was Xterra racing, and my tagline back then was like, keep it fun, right? Like, just have fun, because when you're having fun, you actually are a lot more engaged than when you're like, wow, this sucks. I'm going to start to spiral into like, why am I doing this? And now my tagline is train for a rad life. And so a rad life is fun. But I also have this, like, as athletes that are like I'm 50 years old now. And, there's plenty of evidence indicating that a high level of physical activity, muscle mass, and strength is linked to longevity. And so I definitely have a coaching philosophy that's geared towards, we do this for the right now, what is our potential and how can we push our limits at this moment in time. But I always, in the back of my mind, for every athlete I coach, I'm thinking about their future self. Like, what decisions are we making right now for you? And what does that mean for you 10, 15, 20, 40 years from now? So I like to help athletes develop the mindset and the habits and, kind of almost reverse engineer the long-term athlete development to create some athleticism that helps them to move well and be able to have athletics in whatever discipline lights their fire be part of their lives when they're 80. And so I think for me, this is an experiment right now to just see, okay, how long can I actually keep up to these incredible professional Ironman? And I'm not keeping up to the front girls, which is fine, right? But if I compare year over year, myself to myself, I've gotten better every year. And so that's exciting for me. And I'm no longer worried about being world champion. I'm how long can I push off the inevitable, which is that I have to slow down. And so if I think I can get a little bit faster, I'm going to try. And then I'm going to be okay when that day comes and I'm like, okay, I think I've pushed this professional career really to it's already at the third, fourth, fifth overtime, whatever it is, the 21st inning, and so I just think that for me, doing that and continuing the experiment as long as possible also really shows athletes like Anna Haag, who's 40 years old and the number one ranked athlete in the world, that 40 isn't old. And I think that's an important, that would be what I would like people to have that comfort knowing that, oh, well, Melanie's still doing it. So I'm a spring chicken.
Yeah, that's an awesome answer. And yeah, I think that it's absolutely amazing inspiration-wise to see what you have done and are doing, and to be able to still be improving. It's actually it's a conversation that comes up from time to time with athletes. For me, that athletes ask, "Can I still be improving at my age? I'm 45, I'm 50, I'm 55," and quite often I say that, well, if you had a background as a professional athlete and you're 50 years old, you probably couldn't, but you don't. You maybe started doing triathlon when you were 35, so you can. Actually, you proves, first of all, that that's not necessarily always true. In some cases, even though you have been doing this for a very long time, you can still be improving. So it's not... Obviously, there are maybe cases when that is, or maybe the majority of cases, that is not the case, that most people might not be improving when they're 50 if they have that background, but it can happen. It's not a given that's going to be the case. But with my question is, with age group athletes that don't have that same super deep background in endurance sports that professional athletes might have, do you have, in your experience, at what point, or what is the range, and what does it depend on when athletes start to basically fight normally to maintain their performance levels in triathlon versus improve them?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a good question. And before we leave this, I just want to point out that the reason that I'm motivated to stay is that I definitely benefited from having Dee Griesbauer be in the sport, right? So I know for me, it was there was a security in actually having somebody else there that was slightly older. And so that's why I think that me staying for a little bit longer is beneficial for the girls that are maybe, I think they're about 5 years younger than me. I don't think there's anyone really that close. It's Dee, who's 2 years older than me, and then I think they're 45 is maybe the next oldest. But anyway, so moving on. Okay, so what makes you slow down? I think that is the question that we need to address, because if the consequences of aging don't catch up to you, then you don't have to slow down. And so I think that my primary objective at this point in my career is to address the limits placed on a human body by aging. And so you're absolutely right in that the background of an athlete and what areas they've managed to maximize when they were younger does give you fewer tools to to find improvement, right? Because they may have maximized sort of something. I would argue that at this point in sport in general and triathlon particularly, there are so many advances in coaching science, in nutrition, in hydration, in strength modalities, that the quality of coaching that could be available for coaches that know this stuff is making, just in general, way better athletes than 10 years ago. And so even if you had a coach 10 years ago, they wouldn't have had these tools available that are available now. So the coaching is just so much better. And I think that when I kind of had the chance to work with some elite juniors this weekend, and I see what a 16-year-old can do right now, certainly what I'm describing is not going to be the case when she's 50, because she's benefiting from all of this science right now. So yeah, so the athletes maybe that's 35 years from now, probably won't be able to be 50 and still find great ways to improve. But the current group of 45-year-olds, you absolutely can't get faster. That's my number one thing. Now, what happens right around 50? That's like the middle of menopause, right? So for some athletes, if your sleep goes to hell, you are in trouble, right? You can't recover from very much training. And I think that for whatever discipline you want to do, to a certain point, being able to carry some volume to create a stimulus is important. And you can't carry volume if you can't recover from it. And so if you're lucky and you can sleep well, you will continue to improve. Right around 50, especially for men, is a really bad time for strength and muscle loss. Like men in particular have issues with their lower limbs, starting to experience a lot of sarcopenia, which is like muscle wasting. And it's just like aging, saying, oh, we don't need this anymore. And so for men that aren't strength training, with an eye to maximum strength training, like in the gym, not like trying to be incredibly effective at application of torque to the pedals. That's not enough. And then also probably during points of the year, they probably have to work on some hypertrophy, which is really difficult to periodize with triathlon because they're going to lose muscle. And so it's kind of like you're treading water, even doing work. And so what happens is if you, because of aging, you actually lose your maximum strength and your actual muscle mass. Your muscle mass is your glycogen storage. It's your aerobic capacity, all that kind of stuff. So you would have to work on that stuff. But okay, let's say this athlete has also worked on that. Then the third thing is tissue quality, tendons and ligaments and stuff like that. And so, and then at the same time, it's nervous system engagement. So you get older, your tissues get kind of your tendons get kind of crappy, and your nervous system firing your muscles quickly to, keep those tendons doing their job, being stretchy, also sucks, right? And so at that stage, you also have to work on that. Otherwise, you lose all your speed. So my argument is that a lot of athletes don't include all those things in a really focused way. And training has to build a bridge from who is the athlete now to what do you want that athlete to be able to do? And what roads have potholes in them? What bridges are missing? What are the things that at this point in their life are they starting to lose out of their toolkit? And if you can, and what I'm seeing in my group is that if I can put those tools in the toolkit, they cross the bridge and they go wherever they want to go. They're getting way better. And so training isn't just about intervals and volume. It's about creating a body that has the capacity in a variety of different ways to do that training. And when it has that capacity, there's lots of ways to stimulate. So that's what I'd say about that. Most of the time athletes get old and their bodies don't do the things they want to. So they just have to look at, okay, what are the things that it's not doing?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic answer, and I think I would encourage all the listeners to listen to our previous episode. I'll also, of course, put the links in the show notes where we discussed this in some more depth and length. But I did want to include a bit of a discussion here at the top to celebrate you achieving that goal of going to Kona that we discussed last time. But there's more in that previous episode. So let's move into some listener questions that I got, and let's start with some questions that I get almost every week in some variation. So these are not not going to read who sent these, because I get sent these kinds of questions every week, basically. But the first one is how to set and use training zones, and I'm going to preface this by saying that there's lots of ways, and there's not one magical way that's going to make you a better athlete. There's not necessarily a right and wrong way, but how do you set and use training zones?
Yeah, so early in the year, I generally let athletes try to get a decent level of fitness so that any kind of benchmarking feels better. Like if you're really unfit, benchmarking feels terrible. So most of the training early in the season is based on like, it should feel like this. And I think that that would be something that I would emphasize. Like we're going to go through more of this in this question, I think, but like, I think that any benchmarking you do is based on what your body was like on that day, right? So generally when we benchmark, we want to compare like, okay, what is the best we are? Like we rest to be like, okay, what's the ideal numbers we can get at this current level of fitness? We don't do a whole bunch of volume and then test, right? We generally tend to like rest a little bit. And so rested on this day, like with this amount of fueling and hydration and this level of stress, your body did X. And so then that's how I set training zones. Like it's either if the athlete has access to lactate, I like to use a maximum aerobic power bike test where I do steps. I like get them to blow up at the end. And then I basically estimate on 2 and 4 millimoles. And then I kind of know like how much ceiling they have and where their like delineation of different energy systems they're at. So I like that for cycling.
So with that test, you basically combine a step test and a ramp test. So the steps are a bit like a few minutes and you test lactate, but you do let them go to exhaustion. Okay.
I want to know kind of where their max is most of the time. You can do a step test where you make the steps about 5 minutes and then you only care when they kind of cross around 4 or 5 and they start to like it's clear they're past a sustainable power, which would be your 1 hour power, which for like longer distance is probably what you want to get a little bit more granular with. But I like to know kind of how much ceiling an athlete has. Like, do they have like a massive amount of anaerobic component to a 5-minute interval? And you can tell when you do like a ramp that goes like to failure, right? That, their 4 is down here, but their max is way up there. That's a useful data point. So and obviously right now I'm mostly talking about cycling because the athletes that I coach generally are not going to go into a lab and do a treadmill test of any sort. So if we move to running, for most of the athletes that I have, they just like go and run a 5 or a 10K. And I think that it's a lot like running with lactate to me isn't like it's not as useful to me as a metric for impact stress, for pacing and rhythm, and I just like using what a predicted pace would be based on what they can run for a certain distance, right? So like if an athlete takes 50 minutes to run a 10K, like around 5 minutes slightly slower is going to be what their tempo, their lactate threshold, hour pace, and a lot of stuff that we would put into training in terms of like quality volume would be based off of that. And then like looking at what the difference is between what they can run for a 10K versus a 5K really shows you, okay, like how much VO2 max does this athlete have? Like none, right? So then you can use that. And so I'm very old school with run prescriptions in that regard. Like I think actual proven runability, even like the VDOT stuff that Daniel's used, I think is really valuable for running. And especially for triathlon, we tend to run like triathlon I think that how running was prescribed in that way, I think is really useful for triathlon, like figuring out short intervals for economy and leg speed, and then like having an established interval pace that you would use off of like times that they've actually done to train their like actual, threshold, which would be more like their higher threshold. And then I don't really use anything for easy pace. I think like, especially for triathletes, the amount of fatigue that they can carry, like easy isn't really a pace, it's a feeling. Because some days you can be absorbing loading really well and you feel like $1,000,000, and then you probably just have to like just run easy and slow down. And other days, like it would be a strain to run what would be potentially a prescribed easy pace from like a running specific plan. So that's I use actual races for athletes to figure out what their run paces are. And then for swimming, it's effort. Like I prescribe a percentage effort. So it's all RPE. I think that again, triathletes aren't swimmers. And so very often they're going to go to the pool very tired. And then if their legs are dragging along the bottom, the paces that they can do if we did like 1,000 fresh is going to be way different than 1,000 loaded. Every once in a while, we'll do 1,000-meter test to see like, okay, what is your sustainable pace? More just to see like, is this stuff working? Right? Like, mostly they can tell because I'm a big fan of like kind of expected and repeatable workouts that kind of give them the right feel and the right stimulus that they can do over and over. And generally a lot of athletes like to have that ability to compare one session to the other. And I do that a lot, especially like coming into races, like the week before the race. So they're kind of in a very similar sort of routine. The week of the race, they're in a similar routine. So they kind of can be like sort of benchmarking themselves based on where they were at different times of the year at different races. And it just kind of helps build confidence and like just watch it, like seeing, I did this on this day and then I got this result in this race. I think it's helpful. So, yeah, so I like, that's how I do it. As I generally and then if athletes don't have lactate, because I did only talk about lactate for the bike test, simply doing 20 to 30 minutes all out, to figure out if you do 20 minutes, I would take 92% of that 20 minutes to figure out what your 1 hour pace is. And particularly if you are an athlete who knows you have like really good high end power, because you're probably getting like 6 minutes of that in your anaerobic system and it's not aerobic. And I think it's useful for athletes to every once in a while, like haul ass at a hill for a full hour, because there's a real difference when you get to 40 minutes. And I think that athletes, like every time I set it lower and they're like, but I did this for 20 minutes. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like there's so much muscular strength that's required to actually do a full 1 hour effort. And I think when athletes are doing workouts that are meant to be like just under what that 1 hour pace is, it's really easy to overcook yourself and strain and not understand that a lot of what we're getting out of this is trying to progress the amount of time under that tension so that you potentially could make that desired 20-minute pace your 1 hour. But it isn't, because you actually don't have the muscular strength to do that for that long. And that's why I'm very conservative in terms of what that 1 hour estimation is. And like I said before, just like the threshold test with the ramps or whatever, when you do a bunch of loading and you are tired, whatever these numbers you came up with on a day that you were fresh are going to not be correct anymore. It's like trying to do, 20 minutes. If you tried to do that 20-minute TT after you rode for 3 hours first, it's like a very different body that you're in. And so I use ranges that are very big. And I'll admit that when you coach athletes on Training Peaks and they get a Training Peaks workout that has a ginormous range, and then they take that and they import it into Zwift, And then Zwift gives them one number, and then they just basically like hammer whatever that number is. I've had like every winter, I'm like, you guys, like, maybe you need to start at minus 10% because that's where your range actually starts. And so I just feel like very careful to athletes that really like those built workouts, is you can kind of forget that it's supposed to feel a certain way, and like you want to get it right from a feeling perspective. Otherwise, you're probably, pushing a little bit too hard. And stress is good, strain is bad.
Yeah, that's a fantastic overview, and I definitely recognize that problem with Swift taking the center point of a range, and I think that's something that most coaches have ripped their hair out for at one point or another. Just one more or a couple of follow-ups actually. So swimming, you mentioned that it's prescribed by RPE. Running, it sounds like the specific sessions are pace based, and then easy is a feeling, so that's more RPE based. Cycling wise, I guess is it similar to running, that the sessions are based on power, the harder sessions, I mean, and then the easy riding is more feel based, or
Yes.
do you?
Yeah. Like, I mean, I'll say zone 1, 2, and some athletes know what those numbers are. And I always get an athlete that, is like, okay, zone 2. So I'm going to ride at like the zone 3 minus 1 watt. Right.
Yeah.
So there's always that. I think the one thing I'd caution athletes is if you're trying to ride zone 2 with heart rate, you're going to overtrain. Like, heart rate takes a really long time to catch up with what you're doing. So if you're like doing zone 2 minus 1 watt, and then you start to get, you've just kind of, maybe on that day, you're actually in zone 3 because of what I just previously described, right? You're tired. Like, there was actually a lot more work to push those particular watts because you're not as mechanically efficient. You're short on glycogen because you did a lot of training the day before. And so you're really trying to overdo a session that is meant to be just endurance overload. And most of the time, I don't have a lot of athletes personally that are going to undertrain, right? They kind of like, they have this much time. They aren't like they want to go harder really than they should. And then what happens is just kind of slow down the amount of time it takes till you can go really hard again, or like really focused. And so I think it's okay for an easy ride to feel easy. It doesn't necessarily have to feel like suffering. And especially endurance rides like that are like zone 2. How I describe it to them is like, I have chosen a distance or a time, it's always time, that is what I'm estimating is going to start to challenge you, like in terms of that muscular efficiency. And that's what endurance is like it should feel like it's pretty comfortable up till about the last 30 minutes or an hour. Then you've kind of nailed it, right? So you're starting to get tired and you're ready to get off your bike 30 to 60 minutes before you're done. That means like you've created just enough stress that, okay, it feels like a long time. Your body's like, okay, I got to be prepared to go a little bit longer, right? And then you get off, you recover, you go into your week, you do your intensity or whatever. And then maybe the next week you can add 20 more minutes, or something like that. Like, you can kind of increase that. But that's what an endurance ride should feel like, is that it's pretty comfy for most of it. And then the last little bit, you're like, yeah, I'd like to get off. Right.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm trying to emphasize is I do my best as a coach to try to help athletes to understand what this stuff should feel like. Because ultimately, when you come to race day, you can use your numbers to potentially help you to not overdo it or to give you some confidence or whatever. But you need to know where those delineations are between sustainable and not. And I think you need to practice that in training. So it's just, I think numbers and metrics and lactate and whatever are just, things that you can hang your hat on to further emphasize what something should feel like. But then once you know what it should feel like, you don't really need those numbers anymore.
Yeah, that's perfect. I took a note here because I might use this as a soundbite for the episode with trying to basically teach the athlete, help the athlete, guide them towards knowing what things should feel like. 100%, I agree with that, and that's something that I see for me as a coach. At least the more experienced the athlete, the more I just write a prescription based on some kind of RPE measure, which might be a percentage, or well, for me it's more like usually a 1 to 10 number, or even just a verbal description that it should feel like whatever I I have in my head at that moment. But yeah, they get it, and I think that's and that's where you want to get. If you're more of a beginner athlete, then yes, the numbers are brilliant because they help you. But then as a coach, you also give a kind of a feeling that this is how it should feel, and then over time you learn to get to that point where you can be more and more use feeling, and then the numbers obviously are important still because they show you whether you progress and things like that. But it's not necessary to actually do the training efficiently.
Exactly. And I think I've talked a lot about kind of trying to be under numbers, but if you are holding yourself to a number in a race, for example, and you've like trained really well, you've tapered, you've done your carb load, and all of a sudden you're ready to ride out of your mind, which I've seen multiple times, you could be holding yourself back because you're like, oh, this is my number, right? Well, forget the number. You ride by a feel. And I've had athletes like go to a race and they're like 15, 20 watts above what they thought they could do in a half because they just went out and went like, this feels good. They were scared. And it's actually funny because I'm in this like junior camp with this coach that I had with Neil Harvey that I had way back in 2003, like when I was first in the National Center. And it just strikes me like that comment that I just made about like you're riding out of your mind and you get freaked out. And he used to say to us, like, don't be alarmed if you're going fast. Right? Like, because that you can hold yourself back. So yeah, there's times when you do hold yourself back because, you know, this is what it should be and this is what it should feel like. And then on race day, like if you're always dialed into what it should feel like, you could get that day where you're like riding out of your mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that's important to hear because the typical advice, which is good advice for in most cases, is to, especially in long distance triathlon, half and full distance racing, that to not go over your race plan, even if it feels easy, because it's going to get tough at the end and you need to save your energy. It is great advice. For most people, it is great advice because the tendency is not to go too easy, but it's go too hard too soon and then blow up a bit and lose pace. But if you have gone through your entire training block and you know that you're very in tune with your body and you know what it feels like when you're feeling good and what it feels like when you're not feeling good, and then you kind of have the tools to be able to decide on the day that no, actually this feels it feels like I can do more than I'm doing right now, and you're not going to. So that's also what you're training for, to give yourself the license to on race day just go faster than you had planned to go, basically.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say people that go too hard, and like a full distance is definitely a patience game. Like the effort that you're putting out, you need to be, it does take some experience to understand, like you need to be negative splitting the effort in that so that you definitely don't go too hard at the beginning, because you feel awesome for the first like 60K, right? You're just like, this is so easy. And then it's not. But yeah, if you've prepared well in training to ride that way, and you know what it feels like, you know what it's going to feel like on the back end in terms of that muscular strength demand that I'm describing, even for an hour, and you're prepared for that, and you know, okay, like this is my cruising. I can lift the pace from here. Then it doesn't matter what your numbers say. If you're strong on the day and you're like, you've suddenly like got yourself an extra 10 watts because you benefited from some super compensation, which happens all the time in age groupers, like it really does. You can dial into that effort, you'll ride and run well.
Yeah, definitely. So let's dive into some more specific listener questions. The first one is from Karen, who is asking, my question relates to scheduled workouts and my irregular work schedule. I work as a hospitalist part-time, which means I generally work 1 week in 4 in stretches of 6 to 7 days in a row, with the rest of the days of the month nearly free of work responsibilities. This means I can train as much as my body allows 3 weeks out of 4, But on my on weeks, work keeps me at the hospital often up to 15 hours a day, meaning I tend to be generally exhausted and find fitting in training very difficult. In the summer, I try to commute to work by bike, but this is only a 15-mile round trip. And in the winter, spring, and fall months, the darkness makes this unsafe. I try to make sure the work weeks coincide with a rest/recovery week when following a training plan, but last year I often would completely miss most of the workouts for that week. I know how much you emphasize the importance of consistency in training and realize this pattern is suboptimal. Am I doomed to be limited in my chances for continued improvement, or do you have any specific recommendations for this scenario?
Yeah, I looked at this question and I thought, well, this is serendipitous because I actually have had the experience to work with both a firefighter and a nurse over the past 3 years, and this was the first time I was facing real shift work challenges in terms of time. And so this is how I've successfully approached it, and I think that I'll put in some caveats based on your age and like the other stuff you need to do around work when you're working. The first was like, everybody knows like the whole point of training is to give your body a stress to which it then adapts and gets better. And so what struck me on the scheduling for both these shift workers is that the amount of stress from work and the time available to recover from it, just even the work, was very limited. Like when you have a 12-hour shift and like you're getting to and from work and then you have difficulty sleeping and all the rest of it, like just having your body survive the working was a challenge. One of the athletes I have, she's like in her 60s, and the other's like more in her 40s. And I think the challenge when you're approaching like when you're 60 with the sleeping, it's like for her, it was more like 4 on and 4 off all the time. And we just basically did mobility and light things like light strength sort of stuff on the work days. And basically she would recover. And I would say with the schedule that you have, like, it's even more than you'd want to shut it down even more than like a taper week to be able to absorb a doctor's schedule running around the hospital all the time. So it strikes me that your work week is too demanding to train. Okay, so I'm going to start this. Training means doing workouts that like are asking your body to like adapt to something. So what I would do with this kind of program is I would do exactly what you're doing. You have 3 weeks to build, and you can do your ideal case scenario training on those weeks. And then a way to put this in your mind so you don't feel guilty or compulsive about training on the weeks that you're working that much are like, if you had to travel to a race and you had like 2 days to travel to the event to start with, and then your bike went missing, and then you get there and it's pouring rain and then the pool's closed. What are you going to do in a scenario like that? You're just going to be like, okay, I'm just going to roll with this, try and keep my body healthy so I can arrive to the event, feeling okay. It's not ideal, but plenty of athletes have had all of this crap happen to them the week before a race and arrived at a race and performed well. So in the weeks that you're working this much, you might get in like a really short strength session. And I really like short strength things because they have an anabolic response in your body. They help speed up recovery. They don't drain you further from these really long, stressful days. Like they actually bring something back to your body. You could include a little bit of like running drill work or plyometrics that are really gentle, like maybe one set of something where you're keeping your ground contacts, maybe a bit of skipping, something like that. A couple of those. I do 20 minutes, maybe twice in that week, where you're just like little tiny bouts of strength and plyos to maintain your feel and reactivity, and then help you to recover from the training you did. And then outside of that, I actually think you're riding to and from work in the summer perfect. Like you're actually maintaining some like I would do that at high cadence, do something that has a skill component. You're on your bike enough that those muscles are still getting some stimulus to help them to recover a little bit. And again, it's not drawing anything away from your overall training stress. if you actually had time to go to the pool for 20 minutes, like maybe that's nice after a long day. You get in the pool, you wake yourself up a little bit, you've touched the water. So you're just kind of like spinning the plates in a way that is not a workout at all, because you can't recover from a workout. You need to do like essentially the warm up to keep some feel, keep yourself like, offload some stress from the day, feel like you're doing something, but you're actually doing nothing to like bury your body. Because if you then try to pile on top of this week of like insane work schedule, then when you get into your first week off, you're so tired. So it takes you like 3 or 4 days to actually get into doing the week of work that you've planned in that training. So you're kind of coming into it not recovered, you're coming into it in a hole. And then that will then kind of compound over the next 3 weeks. And then you go to another week of work, bury yourself while you're working. And you know what I mean? So you're actually not coming up and down. So that's how I would do it. I would basically just accept the fact that because you're a superstar doctor and you don't have friggin' time, you don't have time. So you just but you have like an incredible amount of time in the other 3 weeks. So you make sure that you do a super good job in those 3 weeks. And then you just have like hard reset and then you go back. But make sure that when you're on those 6 to 7 day work weeks, you come out of it like as fresh as you can. And you're probably going to need like 1 day at minimum of like rest from that to like be ready to go again. So like be smart and then do your best with the weeks you have training. And there, it could be that you need that entire week to recover from that 3-week block anyway. So it's not like you're getting behind. You're going to be crushing it off that schedule.
Yeah, I really like that answer. Just a couple of small points to add. One is that I have some experience working with doctors with similar schedules, or not exactly the same, but similar. There can be a lot of working, but walking is what I meant to say, involved in those long days, walking through different departments, especially in big hospitals. So that's actually, for one thing, you're not sitting still. So you are still getting some aerobic maintenance stimulus that way. But also one thing that is related to that walking is that if you have a very busy day, which you probably do, then it's easy to forget to eat or not eat enough. So I think, and especially if you're recovering from those hard 3 weeks and then you want to get ready to start again after, I think that's an important thing to make sure that you keep eating well and throughout that work week. And take into account the walking that you're doing at the hospital. And then the other thing especially with helping sleep and recovery during that work week, the big work week, is I think getting some fresh air, it helps a lot with sleep. So if you can, in the morning, instead of just jumping right into your car and driving all the way to the hospital and spending the entire day indoors when you're not, obviously when you're bike commuting, that's perfect, then you get the perfect amount, but it went during winter and fall and so on, then maybe parking the car 1 kilometer or 2 away from the hospital and walking the last little bit can help you get that fresh air and hopefully help you maybe sleep better later that night. So that's something that I would also add, or whatever it is, maybe walking to a bus station that is 1 station away from your own, so to say. So those would be some small tips that I would add.
Yeah, those are definitely good tips too. Yeah. Like just finding little ways to be she's probably very active at the hospital already, but yeah, just trying to have some, there's like forest bathing.
yeah, exactly.
As much as possible.
Yeah. Then the next question is from Ben, who's asking, what are your thoughts on monitoring heart rate whilst training? For example, would you look at the total average heart rate of the session, the lap heart rate of a particular interval, or have the heart rate display as it happens, basically watch the immediate feedback of the heart rate? From my own experience, I find I can get into a better rhythm of monitoring average heart rate or lap heart rate compared to the immediate heart rate. However, I am aware that by just looking at my average or lap heart rate, it will disguise periods when I may be working harder than expected, for instance, going uphill.
Yeah, I think heart rate as a metric is always delayed to what the actual stress on your body is. So like generally, if I'm looking at a heart rate if it's lower than expected to the effort of a session, I might be wondering, is this athlete too stressed out or too tired to achieve the session? If it doesn't go high enough, but they like said they felt really good, then potentially I'm looking at an athlete who just took a jump in terms of fitness. So I think I would always be monitoring what the real-time heart rate is, and then maybe sort of evaluating the averages after the fact. It also depends on kind of what you're riding. If it's like an up and downhill and your heart rate's getting kind of a break, your average will be lower than something where it's a sustained stress, where it's continuing to rise. So I think this is a hard question for me to answer because I'm not sure what we're looking for when we're looking at the heart rate. So I think if you're trying to monitor your effort, heart rate is tougher because it is more variable day to day. And it does take longer to catch up with how hard you've been going. So it kind of always needs to be paired with either what the effort was or what, like in a more objective metric of actual, like immediate stress or effort that the body's made, like your watts or your pace. So that's what I would say. What would you say to that, Michael?
I agreed about looking at the immediate feedback of heart rate as the most important one, at least the one that you can actually make important decisions of in the moment. So the biggest one being if your heart rate is surprisingly low and it's combined with feeling not so good, then that's maybe a sign that you're very fatigued, and you might need a rest. So that's where, if you look at just the average for the session, then you're obviously going to get that information too late. But if you're looking at it 20 minutes into a 3-hour ride and you see that your heart rate is 10 beats per minute lower than what it normally is at the same power, and then you also feel that your RPE is a bit higher than normal for that same power, then you triangulate all three of them. You triangulate an internal and an external load, so pace or power, and the heart rate and RPE, and that way you can get the most information. But if you're feeling good and there's no problem in the session, then I also think that heart rate is maybe, sometimes it's a little bit lower, sometimes it's a little bit higher. You don't need to necessarily bother too much with that. But I think it is good to have. I do think that it's a big advantage to have a feeling for what your heart rate normally is, and for most people, I don't think it varies too much because we train in similar routines, most of us anyway. That we always have our coffee in the morning and then we go and swim, for example. Well, in swimming you might not monitor heart rate anyway, but it might be go out for a ride. So I do think it's very useful, but to do that, to be able to make the inference, then you do need quite some knowledge and understanding about your individual heart rate trends for different types of sessions and steady endurance workouts. So it is immediate, but it does require quite some experience with using it for yourself.
And I think that like heart rate, if that's the metric that you have for some data capture, I think it is useful to that when I started training, because I'm a dinosaur, that's all we had was heart rate. And so we would have every session sort of a percentage of what our maximum heart rate was and then somehow that ended up like a proxy for like how hard the effort was meant to be. So it's, I think looking at average and lap heart rate after the fact can, like in comparing one session to the other, if that's the metric you have, is useful. But I think that on the day, I would always, just kind of look at like where you're at right now and what does this heart rate feel like?
Yeah. And I can add that as a coach, what I look at when we evaluate harder workouts, not just endurance workouts, then what I look at primarily is, first of all, the shorter the intervals are, the less useful heart rate is within them. But within a set, if you do a set of VO2 max intervals, then your highest in the session, that can be quite a useful proxy, and especially if you see that being significantly lower than it has been before. So let's say last week it was you reached for the same session, you reached 175, and this week you reached 170, then that's a pretty significant difference in my mind. And then I would just ask, hey, how was this? How did it feel perceptually? What was your RPE? Was it similar, or was it a bit harder? But then if you have slightly longer intervals, so something like threshold intervals, then I do think that heart rate has time to stabilize, but usually more towards the end or the middle of the intervals. So the average is still not that useful because it depends on how quickly it rises. But I like to then look at, okay, where is the plateau? Where does it stabilize towards the end of let's say if you're doing 8-minute intervals, where does it stabilize? And that I would use in the same way to see if it's unusually low. But also sometimes in those sorts of intervals, I do think that it can be quite useful to see if you're just working a bit too hard for what the threshold efforts really should be.
Yeah, and I'll admit, I definitely kind of can guess what my lactate is based on where my heart rate is, and I'm almost 100% accurate, right?
Yeah.
So I know, like, okay, if I've gone past this particular threshold, then it feels a certain way, and then if I measure, it's showing a certain way. So yeah, but again, it just does come back to understanding like what that immediate heart rate means for you in terms of what your other zones are, like however you're defining them.
Exactly. The next question is from Oscar, who writes, I'm used to train quite intensely for 713s in order to compete in my age group. Recently, I started training for an Ironman and have been focusing a lot on base miles, both on the bike and the run. I tested my FTP on the bike with the 2 times 8-minute test, and surprisingly, it matched my all-time best FTP from when I was training hard for 713. At this point, it feels like long, slow distance training is really improving how I feel during long workouts, but I really don't understand how I've managed to maintain my best bike numbers without doing intense training. This makes me wonder if there is actually a need to train hard for Ironman distance, or if I could just keep doing base miles and improve my aerobic base.
So that last thing he said, do I need to train hard for Ironman distance, or could I just keep doing base miles and improve my aerobic base? So you can keep doing base miles and continue improving your aerobic base 100%. But if you're always training for Ironman, doing these same workouts, what happens is you are starting to, the way I describe it is like you have a pencil and you want that pencil to be as long as possible. So at one end of the pencil, you want it to have the ability to go short and hard. And at the other end of the pencil, you want it to be able to go long and easy. And your body will create the capacity to do the work to which you expose it. And so I think what the 2 by 8 minute test is, is one way of testing this. But what I suspect, if we go back to the beginning of this podcast, I talked about how if you're actually doing an hour, what happens in the second half of that hour is muscular efficiency starts to degrade. And so when you do a lot of longer, steady work, what you are working on is durability, like your ability to hold watts for longer. So it's time under tension. And that durability and that aerobic capacity, so like more muscular strength, more mitochondria, they basically have like the ability to fire more. And they also have the ability to like use and uptake lactate. So, right, like they actually give you like a bigger capacity to do more work, particularly like repeated work, because you're going to sort of like the fitter you are, the faster you recover from hard things. Like you actually have more room. Whereas like if you are not very fit, you can do something really hard and then you basically are dead. So that in a tiny nutshell is sort of how aerobic capacity helps you to be better at what you like your above threshold type stuff, is that you are able to absorb it better. But if you don't use it, you are going to lose it. So this is what it's a phenomenon you see a lot of professional athletes describe, is that they went to Ironman and then they got too slow, right? So they're really good at Ironman. But if you, first off, like there's an efficiency thing where your body, there you have these transitional fibers. And if you do a whole lot of like really long durability training or marathon training in particular, you turn all these fibers into endurance fibers. And then you don't have And they used to be fast twitch fibers that helped you to go fast. And so when you've turned them all into endurance fibers, you've now like taken a bunch of your fastness in a nutshell, turned it all into slowness, and then you just have less capacity for fast. So if you wanted to go back and forth between the two sports, one sport being a contest of metabolic efficiency, which is what Ironman is, and 70.3, which is an extensive fast race, where you can train for 70.3 like an ITU athlete would train and do well at that distance because you are just slowing down to that distance. Or you can train for a 70.3 trying to speed up to it. Like you have lots of durability and you're trying to get a little bit faster, like for that distance, because it's your all out pace now versus you're really fast and then you're slowing down a bit. And somewhere in the middle, is kind of where professional athletes meet from Ironman to T100, right? And I think over time, the Ironman athletes will not be competitive over the half distance because it is short enough that fuel is not the limiter. But Ironman fuel is the limiter, 100%. So for this particular age group athlete, I would say that they're experiencing a really good bump in durability and starting to see that you actually these races are long, even the 70.3 distance. So endurance is a limiting factor in both those events. But in terms of going faster over both distances, you are eventually, as you build your aerobic capacity, going to be limited by your speed potential at both race distances. And that's going to come sooner at the 70.3 distance than at the Ironman distance, because it takes a long time to actually be good at just doing Ironman quite well. So I would say you can't just go slow and expect to be fast.
Yeah, I think it seems like because Oscar hasn't been doing it sounds like he hasn't been doing this kind of base training at all in the past, more coming at the 7.3 from doing quite a lot of hard training. So it makes sense that, well, it's a new stimulus and the body adapts to a new stimulus really quickly when it hasn't experienced that before, and he's getting a good improvement. And probably, I mean, he's wondering how can his high end be equally good the 2x8 minutes as it was before when he's not doing any high end. Well, the energy contribution of the let's say the anaerobic versus or glycolytic versus the oxidative systems is probably different, but you achieve the same power. But it is good news for your performance from sprint distance to Ironman distance, I would say, because it's all aerobic. But that being said, yeah, if you just keep doing long, slow distance, then it's not going to be a new stimulus for much longer, and you're going to stagnate. So finding a way to balance in some faster work, and it doesn't mean you don't have to go swing the pendulum all the way to one side or the other. Like you can mix both in a smart way and periodize as well. So there are periods when you really focus on the base training, but still having some maintenance work, and maybe periods where you're focusing more on the intense side of things. And that will also come down to what event you're training for, what your athletic profile is. There's no one size fits all answer necessarily, but the way that I like to explain it to athletes is that over the course of a season, there should be plenty of room for all of the different intensity ranges, from, let's say, 2-minute power or 3-minute max power to Ironman power, and of course even easier than that when you're going easy, and then how you periodize it. There are a gazillion ways that you can do it, but not getting hung up on one particular, not marrying the method but the outcome. So you can also do is to just introduce a little bit of intensity as maintenance while you feel that you're still improving. But then when you start to feel the improvement slow down a little bit and stagnate, then maybe that's the sign that you should shift emphasis a little bit and see, because that might be the time when you're reaching diminishing returns with the pure focus on long, slow distance.
Yeah. And I think he mostly is talking about that's a great answer, of course. And I feel like he was mostly talking about cycling, but I think in particular, like just all long, slow running becomes like kind of like you don't need to do a lot of fast running, especially for Ironman, but you definitely need to run strides and do some like things to make your tendons bouncy. So a lot of like kind of terrible form, slow running catches up pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah.
So, but it looks like this was mostly about a bike question.
Yeah, and actually that is a good point. Maybe slightly tangential, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts. But I had some discussions with one of my athletes recently about the benefit of having hilly bike rides, because it adds so much variation to your bike riding versus riding on the indoor trainer and then maybe getting stuck in that erg mode and Swift rut, or even if you ride outdoors, but if you only have flat roads available, or you choose to only ride on flat roads, then that's one thing that I've been thinking about and discussing recently, the benefit of hills. And actually for me personally, what I've been doing for the last half year at least, maybe slightly more, is to even when I ride indoors and ride endurance, I don't ride in erg mode. I use Ruvi these days rather than Swift, but even you can do the same in Swift, but just turn erg mode off, choose a hilly route, and then just you get some variation, and it's not going to ruin your endurance ride if you touch zone 3 for 5 minutes going up a hill, but then you can be in zone 1 for another 10 minutes going down another hill, or just spinning easy on the flat, having some more variation. I think that also keeps the stimulus a bit fresher for the body in a way, with variations in power within the rides that you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I have athletes that live in like pancake flat locations, and I get them to ride the hilly courses in Zwift, and I don't care if they're in zone 3, that's fine. I want them to have that variation for sure. I think understanding like what the limitations of erg mode are, you like when you're in erg mode and you're not choosing your gears and you're not riding at a variety of cadences, you are not as efficient at applying like torque to your pedals. And so like being able to accelerate on the pedals is like a very specific cycling force skill that you need to have. And so definitely taking it off erg, and then even just being able to use your gears in a race, right? If you're only used to like Zwift telling you like this is how much more, you're gonna have absolutely no idea like what gear you should be in on like a given grade or whatever. So you need to practice that. I mean, riding a bike is like there's a lot of constraints that make it, like in order to have like the really like nuanced kind of skills for pedaling. You can be kind of okay at cycling pretty quick, like because there's, you're just turning pedals and, it's like there's a small bandwidth. But then, being efficient at that, and then also having this like changing gears is a skill. So you have to do that stuff in training before you get to a race. Now, that being said, like I live somewhere where it's like lumpy always, like steep lumpies everywhere. So actually riding a flat course at the same cadence for 60K in a row without turning around, or what was it? It was like, strikes me that Ironman Arizona was the most flattest and boringest of things ever that I could not prepare for at home. So for me, I actually did do a bunch of erg crap, like sitting indoors in the trainer in November to specifically prepare for something that I can't prepare for at home. So
yeah,
there is the specificity of what you're trying to train for, but you're absolutely right. Like by changing those things, you're putting tools in a toolbox that are required. So yeah. Absolutely, you should do that.
Yeah. Right. So the next question is from Caroline, who's asking, I have a question for a potential Q&A episode. It's about preparing mentally and physically for training, particularly after a long day of work. I'm currently working from home and will be for the foreseeable future. The days can be long and very stressful, and I have noticed my training can really suffer after a particularly hard day. When I train after work, I sometimes feel mentally fatigued and more physically tired than I think I should be. Do you have any tips for preparing to get the most out of a training session? It would be good to hear about muscle activation, but I'm mostly interested in the mental side of transitioning from desk to training session.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people look at warm-ups as just basically a way to start sweating before you, get into your main set. But a warm-up is like, it definitely should warm up your body. You probably want to include in that warm up some efforts that prepare your body for the work at hand. But I also look at warm ups as a chance to start to focus your intention and like get into, okay, I'm going to let the workday sort of go in the background. And so there, I think even having athletes only focus, like not even look really at what the main set is yet. So you don't get too far ahead of yourself. Like, I don't feel like doing this, so I'm just going to focus on what is the warm up today to help to like give yourself a chance to narrow your focus. And then warm ups for running in particular, like I really like having some dry land activation, things for your thoracic spine before you even start jogging. Then you do like a lot of like really easy and maybe progress your running to, again, get focused on what you're doing, feel your body out, let it like relax into the session really slowly. And then while your head's coming into it, then you actually need to really think about what you're doing, especially swimming and running, because they're both very technical sports. So doing that, giving yourself a chance to do some drill work that helps you to feel, especially if you're doing something fast, to feel bouncy on the ground or whatever. And I think using the warm up as and looking at it as a way to center yourself, and so especially when you're coming off you don't know if you really feel like doing it, but if you're like, okay, I'm just going to do the warm up and I'm only going to focus on what's in my warm up, and have your warm ups have enough things that if you're sitting at your desk, you probably need to do some mobility before you get on your bike. Same with running, same with swimming. And then you spend 5 minutes doing like cat cows, some child's pose, and some T-spine rotations. Then you like get on your bike. Now you've been away from work for, 4 minutes. You get on your bike, you're going to ride easy for 4 minutes. Not a big ask. You don't have to get stressed out about it. And then you start, incorporating some short priming things that get your attention enough, but don't hurt, so that you can decide whether or not you feel good. And then probably by the time you've done 20 minutes of that, then you're like, yeah, I actually like training and this is my time. And now I'm going to like maximize my focus and make the best of it. I think you just get too far ahead of yourself when you like are looking at a session and what the main set is and having to go hard. Just give yourself that transition and especially like some body activation that helps you to feel a little bit better before you start.
Yeah, no, I like all of those things. Just a couple of things to add is how you go through your entire workday. That can also have an impact on how you then mentally get into the workout at the end after the workday. So basically, things like hydrating throughout the day, making sure that you eat enough, and ideally also getting frequent short breaks where you can walk around, step away from your desk, and maybe look at some paintings of nature that can help, or something similar. But at least at least take a few steps, walk around, not be stuck at the desk for hours on end, and that will help your work productivity as well. So I think that those are some things to consider for just how you go through your workday, and that can help make the transition easier, because you just finish the workday feeling better than you would have otherwise if you're just stuck at your desk and forget to drink and eat and things like that.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
Then the next question is from Michael, who's asking, being new to intervals, I have a question about the recovery portion of an interval. When recovering, is the idea to get heart rate below a value as quickly as possible and getting the most time in recovery? Or is it better to start the next interval after a specific recovery time has expired, no matter how much recovery has been experienced by measuring heart rate or RPE?
Yeah, that's a good question, I guess. So generally, like recovery is designed so that you have enough of a break in this bout to be able to repeat the bout at the same intensity. So generally, like if you are doing something that's like below your critical power, so something below FTP, you should need and the intervals like, I don't know, anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. You should only need about 3 to 4 minutes, because theoretically you can hold that for an hour. And so if you're doing intervals that are meant to stimulate the kind of stress that you would have in like an hour type effort, the amount of work to rest is short, because you want to maintain the pacing and the effort that's specific to that long a duration of an effort. So then your rest intervals are meant to be short. And if you can't repeat at the same power after that relatively short rest, then the effort was too high. So generally, like, rest matches sort of the intensity of the effort. And in contrast, if you're trying to do something like 5-minute efforts at VO2 max, you don't want the rest to be super long, because the idea is to spend time at VO2 max. And the longer you rest, the longer it takes when you start the next interval to get to VO2 max. So that's a specific type of training where you're trying to like go very hard and have a very strong uptake of oxygen. You're going fast, and VO2 max efforts, very often you want them to be also at like the pace and intensity that is your VO2 max. So you want to be fresh and good enough to like experience the velocity of that or the power of that, because it's there's specific coordination and strength that is associated with going that fast. But if the idea is you want to get your heart and lungs to work really hard, you can't rest so much, because it'll, like, maybe in the first repeat, it was 5 minutes long. It took you 3 minutes to get to VO2 max. If you take too long in between, it'll take you again 3 minutes to get to VO2 max. And then you've only spent like 4 minutes out of a total of 10 minutes exercising at VO2 max. But if the idea is you want to run as much as possible at your VO2 max pace, because you want to have that coordination, that impact stress, that feeling of running that fast, and you want to be able to repeat the pace of that, and you're less concerned with like what your heart and lungs are doing. So then you would let yourself recover maybe 5 minutes in between, because it's more important to run the pace than it is to get the intensity, like the heart rate and the breathing rate of VO2 max. So if you are trying to have a very strong cardiovascular response to high intensity, you rest just enough to be able to continue to get that cardiovascular response. So then maybe your rest might be 2-3 minutes, but you're only doing like, maybe you could do 3 by 5 minutes or something like that of that. Because I don't know, like anywhere from like 10 to 12 minutes is a lot of VO2 max work. But if you want to like run at 5K pace, for instance, you might do like 3 by a mile at your 5K pace, and you take like a full 5 minutes in between each one in order to run each one like very fast. So I think it depends on what the objective of the interval is. If your objective is to get a cardiovascular response, you match the amount of rest to continue to get that cardiovascular response you're looking for. If the objective is to practice the watts, the force times cadence of your high intensity watts, and you want to keep repeating that, you have to be able to recover from that. So then, yeah, maybe you have to bring your heart rate right down to where you're fully recovered from each rep, so that you can then do another rep at that same quality of intensity. Was that does that make sense, Michael? Like what?
It makes sense. I think you can be the judge here of my. I don't know if it's a hot take, but maybe it's something that is a bit different. But I think for me, how I think about recovery is that in VO2 max intervals, at least from the perspective of we're trying to improve the cardiovascular system, so not the running at speed, but just purely VO2 max as we know it, oxygen uptake of the body. Then I have specific rest intervals, so between a 1-to-1 to a 2-to-1 work to rest ratio. And for example, swimming would be more like 2-to-1, running would normally be 1-to-1, and cycling also normally 1-to-1, but it depends a little bit on the way the session is. So there, the recovery, I think, matter. But anything that is threshold and below, I think recoveries don't matter so much, or they do matter in the sense that you need enough recovery. but I think that sometimes we overthink having to have short recoveries or optimizing how short can the recoveries be. And I would rather take a session that has a bit more work at the intensity we're working at, even if the recoveries are long and even if it's spread out over a long session. So for example, I would consider a 2-hour ride with 4 15-minute intervals at close to threshold, even with 10-15 minute easy between the intervals. That would still be a very good threshold session in my book. It's not that I prescribe that session super often, but I could just as well. And I don't think we necessarily have to think about just how short can we make the recoveries between the 15-minute intervals, because and this is when we're talking about threshold and below intensities. Basically, for me, I'm more interested in what is the amount of work that we're doing, and then just doing it.
Yeah,
What do you think about that?
I agree with that for sure. And I'll do like stuff like I'll ask athletes to do 3 by 30-second maximum sprints somewhere in the last 30 minutes, and you have to take a minimum of 5 minutes, but you can take as many minutes as you want rest in between. Just do it again. So I think the only time that recovery time might matter more is if you're maybe doing something that's sort of over under, but then maybe you might be prescribing the under effort to be, also sort of capped or targeted, so that you're like keeping the heart rate in a range. That's when you're like trying to like ride the threshold just a little bit over and a little bit under. Then maybe your recovery might matter because you don't want it to go down too far. That might be a specific type of workout where the recovery matters. But
and I would say maybe when you get
answer, because we don't know what kind of set we're talking about.
Yeah, I also think when you get closer to a race and you want to do race specific sessions, let's say it's an Ironman specific bike simulation. One session that I like is 3 times 1 hour on the bike at Ironman power, and then I think between 5 and 10 minutes between those intervals. But then obviously the intervals are so long that at that point you don't have much time to take 1 hour between intervals. But let's say a 7.3 specific session, 5 by 20 minutes on the bike is I like that one, for example, or 6 by 20 minutes depending on the athlete. 4 to 6 by 20 minutes, and there I like basically 5 minutes between the intervals usually, because then we really want to also use it as a pacing test or pacing assessment to see, is it actually a feasible race pace for you? Because if you can't do those intervals on short recoveries and it feeling kind of good or reasonable, then we basically need to lower the target race pace.
Yeah. I think the only time that I would say that this becomes kind of a thing is like in some old school sort of swimming prescriptions, because in the olden days swimming would just never take any rest, right? So I think sometimes in a lot of sets I see with swimming, they don't make any sense. Like the demand in terms of like how fast athletes are trying to swim and the rest that they're giving themselves to try and swim that fast, it's like obvious why they're all blowing up. So I think that in general terms, if you want to do something very hard and maintain the quality of that, you need to take enough rest that you feel like you can go hard again. And so that might be somewhat individual. So I think in this, like maybe if the specific recovery time he's feeling is not quite enough for the intensity he was trying to go, then he's right. He needs to let not necessarily his heart rate come down as much as like he needs to feel like in his body he's capable of going again. So again, see, I always go back to feeling. Like a lot of times you can get sets right just by knowing what you should feel like, and just keeping track on like, are you maintaining the intensity that was like expected of a session?
Yeah. Let's take the next 3 questions that we have on the list, and because we're running short on time, and they are a bit shorter, these sessions questions, at least in terms of word count. So let's see if we can get through them. I'm just switching the order a little bit, but Rasmus asks VO2 max specific intervals without raising VLA max.
Okay, so you are saying you wanted. So I'd say like if you're not trying to raise your VLA max, you don't want to change your metabolism. So I would say you do like
The glycolytic metabolism, the
Yeah,
glycolytic
yeah. So
system.
I think that I think, okay, so first off, like you could do a session here and there of like just whatever VO2 max type work you want to do, and it's not immediately going to change your overall like what your VLA max is. It actually takes like work to move that in a variety of directions. Um, so I would say that um I you just don't you wouldn't want to continually be working on that specific quality frequently. So you're not trying to elicit a lot. So you wouldn't do 2 sessions per week of VO2 max specific training week in, week out for a 6-week block to try and actually like move the meter in a direction. What you might do is you might start a session with some VO2 max so that you can and I'd say that if you're not trying to raise that, but you want to do those intervals, what you're trying to do is maintain some running economy or like some capacity above your threshold for riding. So you're trying to keep some of that quality, but keep your efficiency in terms of your long distance capacity in place. And so what I would do is I would do mixed sessions where you might start the session while you're fresh, and you might do, I don't know, like maybe um, maybe like 6x400s where you're actually running at VO2 max pace. And then I would go into maybe you're doing like 3 or 4x1200 or a mile sort of reps with very short rest, where you then go back to like sort of nailing what your probably something more like your like 1 hour pace is in the same session. And so you put some stress on yourself before when you started, you hit on that energy system VO2 max, the quality that would improve the economy of your running at the beginning. And then you kind of go into some sessions that more nail the threshold and keep you underneath that, keep you using those fibers in the way you want to run a great marathon. Similar for riding, I think that you could do some 2-minute repeats at the start of a long ride, and then do your long ride, include some like quality work below your first, like before LT1, kind of do some, I call it zone 2A, like zone 2, but like kind of the top. And sometimes it feels like you're kind of like straddling that first threshold. And then maybe at the end, because you want to maintain some of that recruitment, you do some sprints at the end of that ride. So the way that I would do this is I would keep the specificity of my training, because you want to be durable and have really great endurance. Like that's the overall theme of the block to start with. But you do mixed workouts where you hit on some of these things, so you maintain the ability to hit that intensity, but you're not trying to change fiber type.
Yeah, I have kind of two different thoughts on these questions, or two options. So one is if Rasmus is asking if he has, maybe I'm not sure if he knows or doesn't know or has measured actually VO2 max and VLA max, but maybe one thought is that potentially he just knows that he's good at short efforts and not so good at long efforts. Let's say good at 2-minute efforts, not good at 1 hour efforts or 20-minute efforts. Then you don't necessarily know if that's because just your VO2 max might be high, but your efficiency and your metabolic side of things is not as good. It doesn't have to necessarily mean that you have a high glycolytic capacity. It could be just that's the way that your aerobic system is built. And then in that situation, I think what Mel suggested with the mixed sessions, doing a bit of VO2 max maintenance work, but then prioritizing the longer stuff, the efficiency and metabolic training, then that would be a perfect solution. The other one is that if you actually know that you know your VO2 max and your VLA max, and your goal is to not raise your VLA max, I'm not convinced that VO2 max intervals would raise VLA max, because even though you might reach a relatively high lactate at the end of a set of that, it's what we are training is in the name. We're training the maximum aerobic capacity, VO2 max. And for example, if you look at somebody like Usain Bolt or whatever sprinter in whatever sport, maybe not swimming, don't look at swimming, but then they would, Usain Bolt infamously has said, I'm not sure if this is true, but this is what I've heard, that he never ran farther than a lap of a track. So like if you really want to have a high VLA max, then you never do long stuff, and VO2 max is quite long in this context when you're doing things like 1 minute intervals, 2 minute intervals, and you repeat that on relatively short rests. So I'm not sure that it actually raises VLA max. I wouldn't be too worried about that from a physiology perspective. The more interesting question is if you do have that kind of power duration profile or pace duration profile, that you are better at the short efforts and worse at the long efforts, then just think of it in terms of a functionally rather than physiologically, I would say, and do maybe a little bit of maintenance of what you're good at, but focus your efforts more on what you're not so good at.
Yeah, and I read it more like this is like, so if you're getting prepared for a marathon and your marathon is imminent, it's like 5 weeks out. If you are constantly training like 5K pace during that block of training, what you're doing is you're trading, just like I was talking about the fiber type, you're trading some of your fibers that were trained to all this endurance that you've done for weeks and weeks to get ready to be super economical for a marathon. And you're now like asking them to go back to the other team. Like you're saying, okay, I'm going to do 5K work and then again, this just like sort of shows my bias as a triathlon coach to use like run specific distance intensities to like manage the training intensity. And so VLAM max is that, like for a marathon, you want to have a very low VLAM, but they're basically saying, you are going to train very specifically to be economical at your marathon pace, and you're going to get really strong. And the fastest you probably want to run coming into a marathon, other than a stride, like something like strides or short sprints or whatever that really aren't going to change any of this stuff, like that's the good way to maintain your speed, is to be a one distance maximum, maybe 10K pace below marathon, right? Because then you're maximizing your endurance potential for marathon, which is an entirely different beast, just like Ironman is. And that's why I think VLA max is a thing in triathlon, because marathons and Ironmans are a completely different ask in terms of training specificity from every other distance. And so what do we do VO2 max specific for is to be punchy and powerful. And so you have to look at, okay, why do we need that? Yeah, I think it helps with maximum strength. So there is some validity in including that kind of training to get ready for a longer distance race. But if you do too much of it, or you're not specific about why you're doing it, then you're going to trade your endurance for speed, and you're not going to use it. So, and then you're actually eroding your speed potential. And I think that's what I would say from this question is like, what do these two things bring to your toolbox, and what are you trying to do?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think it comes down to, it doesn't come down to, but it is, you're describing specificity, right? And that's really important for
exactly.
Whatever triathlon distance we're talking about. We're going to be performing at or below threshold. So VO2 max, even VO2 max, it has its place, but it's not something that you need to do like all the time necessarily. Or or the other option is that maybe you do a little bit of it throughout the year, but then you do it kind of sparingly, like short sprinkles of it in sessions. So but not so much that you trade that capacity for the specificity. So I think we're in agreement, but it is a bit like a little bit hard to understand the question or know exactly what the question is asking. Then so Christina asks, swim threshold sessions, to take or not to take 100 meters easy swimming between threshold reps in a set like 10 times 200 meters at critical swim speed.
Okay. I didn't see this question. Okay, so
it might have been one of those that came in late that I added late. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So so critical swim speed. So is this is like a best average set?
Let's read it as critical swim speed. So like basically your maximum metabolic steady state. So not a best average.
Okay. Yeah. So again, I think that why are we doing this session? So like, what is it that we're trying to get? Are we trying to maximize our cardiovascular response to high intensity swimming? Or are we trying to maintain our ability to our rhythm coordination and timing and maintain the speed, because that's what we want to preserve for each interval. Like, what is the deliverable? And I think for swimming in particular, the being able to maintain that rhythm of swimming, and like the feel and coordination of swimming that fast is really important. So whatever you need to do in terms of resting to be repeatable at that speed, I think is important. Because what's funny is that like swimming is different from our other sports in that it can take like an exponential amount of power to go 2 seconds faster, right? So you can all of a sudden like blow it with like 1 or 2 reps, and you then you've basically died like two reps into a set because you've gone way too hard for like way too little speed. So I think that in swimming itself, like making sure that your set is designed, if you want to practice swimming fast, that you can swim fast. So how you rest, right? So the difference between, it's just like standing rest on the road in between repeats or jogging rest on the road. Like, what are we trying to do? If you jog the rest on the road, you're adding a little bit more distance. There's a little bit more impact stress in between each rep. Your heart rate will stay a little bit higher in between. And so there's just a little bit, like, it's not complete rest. Like it's resting, but you're still adding stress. So for reps that are, like if you want to keep the volume up in the set, or you want to make it a little bit more specific in that you're having like an endurance component to it, I think active rest is useful, right? And I think that when we did big like repeats of high intensity swimming, and there was like enough rest that I could swim in between, especially when I was doing like getting ready for an Ironman race, I would swim in between. And I also did that because I think it's useful in, if anything, in Ironman, you might have a couple little surges that you need to cover and then recover and then recover from. So I think swimming the rest was a lot more race specific. But if you need to sit on the wall, think about what you did and rest, and then go again to like have that full engagement for each rep, I think that is fine, right? Because the most important thing is to practice swimming fast, relaxed, and not comfortable, but being able to like repeatedly swim fast. I think that is a thing that you need to give yourself the right environment to do that.
Yeah, exactly. I come back to what I said before about recovery, is that it probably matters way less than we think, as long as you get the work done. So if you're getting the 10 by 200 in a general sense, general swimming improvement, right? So in this case, improving your threshold, and obviously when you improve your threshold, things around threshold generally improve as well. So it's not just so super specific. But anyway, then when we talk about being closer to a race, then you can definitely design the session more specifically to your race. So before an Ironman, maybe you want to do that kind of threshold swim set, which would be good to work on slightly faster than, or clearly faster than Ironman pace. And then, as Mel said, taking the 100 meters easy swimming between would give you a good kind of fairly continuous flowy set of swimming that would be quite specific to the Ironman. So that would be a good set. And whereas if you're training specifically for a 713, then that's 1,900 meters. Your set here is 2,000. So and the intensity is obviously higher. So that would be a pretty specific set for a 713. So in that situation, when you get closer to the 713, then taking it as pretty short rests on the wall is maybe the better option there, just from a specificity standpoint. But if we're talking about being a bit farther out from a race, or not thinking about specificity, then I don't think it matters. Do whatever makes you perform the workout better and feel better about it, and have more fun in it, which is part of it as well.
Yeah. And how I would design that from a, like, just like at the beginning, from a building a bridge perspective, is that I don't know, but the 100 rest in between, whatever you want to do, but I would start that at like 10 by 200, where if the 200 takes 3 minutes, they get 3 minutes rest, right? Like, so let's swim 10 fast 200s. And then as we like start to get closer, then we start to try to hold that pace with less and less rest, to the point where when you get to, maybe it's Ironman week, you're doing it, instead of 10 by 200, you're doing 20 by 100, and then you're only taking 10 seconds, or you start at one pace time with 10 seconds rest, and it's maybe 5 seconds slower than what you would want to hold at your ideal pace. And then you like drop the rest and the pace by 5 seconds. And then it's exactly at that pace for 5. And then your last 5, you've dropped the pace time by another 5 seconds. So you have to swim 5 seconds faster than what that is. And so then you have this build body of work where ideally that center line was the pace that you held with 3 minutes rest, or like off 3 minutes rest earlier in the season. So it's classic, like extensive endurance, like just try to create the capacity to do the work rested, and then have that become increasingly tolerable for longer bouts of time.
Yeah, brilliant. And the final question, and I believe you don't have this in your notes either, sorry. Richard asks, do you believe brick sessions are a necessary part of triathlon, and why?
Okay, so that's it. It's funny because I was at this junior camp, which is an ITU camp specifically. And I went, and as a coach, I was actually in the group helping the juniors to do a brick. And one of the more elite older girls asked me like, Mel, when was the last time you did a brick? And I was like, oh my God, I don't know, like 14 years ago, something like that. So, okay. So bricks, like a brick session is a really great way to get super specific about what the demand of the sport is. So from an ITU perspective, this brick that we did, we started with like a fake T1 where they like lay on the ground and they had to run to their bikes, get in their pedals with all the elastics and all that crap, and then get on their bike and go. Right. And so then they practiced T1, and then we came around and they had to jump off their bike, and we practiced T2, and then we went into a short run, practicing almost the transition portion of this workout was a big deliverable for, and brick workouts, that is the deliverable. You want to be pretty granular about what is it about a brick that makes it different than doing a back-to-back session of some sort that isn't like that. And when you're in ITU, 5 seconds in transition is the end of your day. So it is a very specific and important demand of that discipline of triathlon. At Ironman, especially like if you're an age grouper, like you're not allowed your shoes on your bike. You've got this weird bag. You're going to run for like potentially 5 minutes and put your helmet on. You got tons of time. Like the transition component of it, it's not a bad thing to be good at that. But it's going to be a lot different in terms of like that 5 seconds over the course of 9 hours is going to be inconsequential. So that part of it is not as important. Also, when the race is like a sprint distance race, being able to transition from the swim to the bike with your like an understanding what the pacing is, to be able to like not kill yourself in the swim before you get on the bike. And like if you go to like a lactate of like 9 when you're swimming, and then you stand up and run, and then you're at like 11, and then you get on your bike and you're basically trying to recover the whole time you're on the bike, and then you don't. And so then you get into the run and you're meant to run like 5K pace, but your lactate's already at 9, like you're going to die about 2K into it. So, and from a pacing perspective, particularly at those really high intensities, practicing the feeling of that is important, because transitioning between like swim to bike and like a lot of the time bike to run, especially when the bike is stochastic and it's punchy and whatever, is something that you want to prepare your body for, because you do use slightly different muscles, but you also need to know, okay, what can I tolerate here? Like, can I attack this group and still run fast or not? And so again, this is a specific thing that happens in triathlon. More often it's going to happen in the ITU format. But similarly, I can see like if you are really fit and you've ridden the bike really well in a 70.3, it's pretty easy to come off the bike and run 5K pace for the first 3K. Like you can actually feel like that. So I think it's kind of better to maybe do that in training and realize you're going to die, versus like do it in your first race of the year and then get to the last 3 of 21 kilometers and you know, have a really tough time getting to the finish line. So I think bricks are a really good way of helping yourself to understand the pacing for different events. Why have I not done a brick in 12 years? Because I have a really clear idea of what the pacing is for these different races. I've done a lot of races. I'm really sure that I know what it should feel in my body. But every once in a while, like I'll still do, like I'm not like the ITU athletes, like I don't set up transitions or anything like that. But frequently I'll do a hard bike where I finish hard and then I come off and run hard, even for a short period of time, like 10 or 15 minutes, something like that. Just to remind myself what it's going to feel like. So even in my head, okay, this hurts a little bit for the first 5 minutes, but it kind of settles down. It's almost like that book Endure by Alex Hutchinson. Sometimes you can prepare your brain for the pain by just giving it small doses of it in advance of the race. And brick intervals are the ultimate in triathlon specificity. So they don't belong in the wintertime, like before, like when you're filling your toy box full of like really good capacity and other things. They're things that you do in the last phase of really race specific training to get ready for an event that's coming. Like that's pretty much the only place I think they belong. But practicing transitions on their own, that belongs in the wintertime or before. Like you're putting together the pieces and building your bridge. And then once you're like going over to event specific training, then you put all that stuff together. Like what do you think of that, Michael?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's basically the exact same that I would say for me for an age grouper training for almost no matter what the distance is, but especially for 73 and Ironman, I think doing a couple of specific brick sessions in the final month before the race, I like that because of exactly as you say, figuring out the pacing aspects and also the nutrition hydration aspects, all of the equipment aspects as well. So you want to be riding outdoors in position with the way that you're going to carry hydration on race day and the way that you're going to carry nutrition on race day, so you can practice all of that. Make sure to get in the amounts that you want for on race day, and then see when you add a significant amount of bike race power, and can you still run at your planned race pace? And then if that doesn't go well, you correct things, whether it's in terms of pacing or nutrition hydration for the next time. So for me, really, it helps you validate your pacing, your nutrition and hydration. That is the main thing. It's not about, you don't learn to run, you don't get better at running faster off the bike by doing bricks. I don't think that's the case. And I think it's the same thing even in ITU, but as you say, it's the pacing, and it's so much more complex with the higher intensity. Obviously the transitions there being super important, but you see, I think, I don't know, tell me what if you disagree, but I think a lot of you, almost all youths and juniors, they do a lot of brick sessions in training, which makes sense because they are kind of new to the sport and it's one of those things that they need to figure out. But then when you see what the people in the WTCS are doing, I think not a lot of them are doing hard brick sessions really, because they've already figured that out. They already know how to pace themselves, and they're not getting any better at running off the bike by doing brick sessions. They're getting better at running off the bike by getting stronger on the bike or stronger on the run or even stronger on the swim, so that they have more energy left for the run, and the pacing they've already figured out by this point.
Yeah, and so like this was a camp for like
Youths and juniors,
type hopefuls. So they're definitely learning the skills. And the other thing I would add to that is that some like those more experienced athletes that are at the top level of the sport, they also race quite a bit, so they get a lot of practice doing this in a really like specific way. So I mean, they just only have so much time to prepare. The season is really long and it has lots of travel, so it just doesn't fit, in order they want to do standalone sessions that are really going to move the meter for one of the three sports, and they don't necessarily need to put them together anymore.
So are they necessary? I think that they still. what is the conclusion? I think it depends. Like I think when you get to a certain level of experience, they are no longer necessary. When you know your pacing, you know your fueling and hydration and so on. But I think they are necessary at some point, until you get that experience, or you just race your way to that experience. That's the other solution if you do a lot of racing.
Yeah, and I'll admit that sometimes I do well, very often I do what looks like a brick because I just want to add some frequency, and I'll just get off my bike and I'm already sweaty and I'll just go run because it's just I want to add some volume. And there's like no point to that other than it's going to be fine. Like I can do 45 minutes of running on tired legs, try and hold it together and like have good form, and I've completed a session, and that's fine. It would be equally as beneficial if I waited 3 hours and went and ran it, but sometimes it just comes off the bike because it's convenient. And for sure for age group athletes, like putting a little bit of running right after the bike because they actually might have that extra 20 or 30 minutes if they stick it in right there, fine. Right?
Yeah,
but
and
that's
time
not
time
really a
time
brick.
time efficient. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. Well, I've held you for a long time, but this has been brilliant, super fun. So thank you, Mel. I really appreciate it. Tell the listeners where they can find you.
Oh, yeah. So, like all my socials are Melrad Coaching. So you can find me there. And then my website is melrad.com. And otherwise, you can just find me rolling around in Victoria, BC, trying to get ready for races this year. But yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm a huge fan of the show. I really like, I mean, I'll admit, I really like listening to other coaches on the show and like learn. I think it's a really cool time in which like coaches can actually learn from each other and actually, kind of really think about how other people are doing things. And I just really appreciate you creating this forum for people to come together and listen to each other. It's really cool. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you. Speak soon. Bye.
See you later.
I hope that you enjoyed that interview and the Q&A section, which was more of a discussion and co-hosted part almost than an interview per se. I have to say that for my part, I really, really enjoy that. So I'm curious to hear your feedback if it's something that you want to hear more of. Of course, it's something that we have done fairly regularly on the podcast, but it's been a little while maybe since we've done that. So hopefully you enjoyed it. And but either way, let me know your feedback. I'm always happy to hear feedback. You can find all of the relevant links in the show notes on scientifictriathlon.com and in the episode description. Don't forget to check out the previous appearances that Mel has had on the Triathlon show. So that was in episodes 374 and 196. Both of them really interesting interviews and well worth checking out, in my opinion. Now, I am about to head off for our Scientific Triathlon training camp in Mallorca, which looks set to be a fantastic week with perfect weather. And it's Mallorca in spring, so what more can you ask for? Among the best cycling in the world, in my opinion. So that means that I am having a very busy week recording and putting together this episode and all of the other things, of course. But as it's already quite a long episode, I'll skip the personal takeaways for this episode, and hopefully I'll bring it back for the next episode that I record when I'll have a bit more time and a bit less stress, and I'll get back into the habit of doing these personal takeaways. But instead of that, what I'll do now is I'll read out the podium picks that I got after the actual interview with Mel today, and also after the interview with Bex Milnes a couple of weeks ago. So first, Melanie McQuaid's podium picks are, and she actually writes here that she doesn't have a particular order. We do need to get an exact order to put in the spreadsheet so that we can run the competition properly. I'll get that for her and put the correct order in the spreadsheet that you can find through the link in the episode show notes. But so what I read out here is just the order that she wrote her answers in the email that we had, the email conversation that we had going on after. So the order might change, but her picks nevertheless are for the women, Cassandra Beaugrand and Beth Potter and Georgia Taylor Brown. And she writes, as a dark horse, Flora Duffy, if she gets back to racing, go Xterra. And for the men, her Melanie McQuaid's picks are Christian Blumenfeld, Hayden Wild, and Leo Berger. Her dark horse here is Tyler Mislechuk, go Canada. Now, Bex Milnes, if you listened to that episode a couple of weeks ago, episode 429, she had the following picks, and these are in order. For the men, she picks Alex Yee, Pierre Lecour, and Hayden Wild. And for the women, she picks Georgia Taylor Brown, Cassandra Beaugrand, and Beth Potter. Very interesting pick there, having Georgia Taylor Brown taking the gold, and after her less than stellar last year. But that being said, in the early season races that Georgia has done, albeit at a lower level with continental cups, that she seems to be on her way back to form. So that could happen, and if it does happen, then that would put Bex in a good position, because in this competition, because not a lot of people have, well, nobody has picked her so far of the guests. Everybody has picked either Beth Potter or Cassandra Beaugrand, who are undoubtedly the two big favorites. But I do like that pick of Georgia Taylor Brown, and I think that if she can get back to form, for sure she can be a really big factor in the race and potentially win. Now, a bit of promotion for our services on scientifictriathlon.com. You can find all of the information for coaching, customized plans, and ready-made training plans on the website. But we got a recent training plan review from Carolina in Colombia, who used the advanced half-distance plan, rating it 10 out of 10 and commenting, quote, "I was training 6 years with triathlon teams, and I was frustrated in terms of results, training environment, schedules of training, and bored with the quality of the trainings. I tried to find a personal coach, but the prices were too high. And searching on Training Peaks, I found this plan. It led to my first time at the age group podium, getting third in my age group, 12th female overall, and qualifying for the World Championship with my best ever swim, bike, and run splits." End quote. She also writes, and I love to hear this because this is very important to me, quote, "The plan is structured to increase the self-knowledge in terms of paces, watts, and perception of effort. And during the race, I faced exactly what I trained for," end quote. So that's an example of how a ready-made training plan can help you. And especially as we have talked about before, coaching isn't the cheapest. It is a big investment. It is a very personalized service. So understandably not something that everybody can commit to. And in that situation, I think that ready-made training plans that are a fantastic option. And we have a bunch of them on scientifictriathlon.com for beginner level to advanced athletes, from sprint distance to full distance Ironman. So check them out. And even better results is what you get when you combine a good starting point from a ready-made training plan with the knowledge that you gain through listening to this podcast. Then you can use that plan again as a starting point, but tweak it to suit your individual needs. That is definitely my strong recommendation when using a ready-made training plan. All right, so you can find out more on scientifictriathlon.com/plans, and don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions. So about next episode of that triathlon show, as I said, it might be Dirk Friel, CEO of Training Peaks, depending on how our scheduling will work out. So do send in all of the questions, great questions that I know you will have for him about Training Peaks and training platforms. And we'll see if it will be Dirk on the next episode or if I have another guest in the meantime. But stay subscribed and you will make sure to get all of the episodes right in your podcast app. Finally, big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Fuel and Hydration, that you can find on precisionfuelandhydration.com. If you're looking for high quality, practical, and tasty fueling and hydration products, make sure to try Precision Fuel and Hydration. There are a range of options from drink mix to gels to chews, so you can easily find your personal favorite. Don't forget to take 15% off your first order with the code TTS24. And thank you to Zenate. The Zenate Swim Trainer is a great tool to have in your toolbox to improve your technique and power, to target specific aspects of your stroke, and to maintain consistency when you don't have time to get to the pool. You can try the Zenate risk-free for up to 30 days and get 20% off your first order on zenateswimtrainer.com/TTS. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.